San Diego is in the midst of a housing affordability crisis. Is rent control the solution? Voters have the power to approve or deny a critical funding stream for San Diego schools. Several districts are asking residents to approve bonds. Prop 64 paved the way for recreational pot in California, and San Diego cities are coming to terms with it in their own ways. And truth is a casualty in controversial political ads and immigration rhetoric as Election Day looms. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me today at the KPBS Roundtable, reporter Taryn Mento of KPBS News, reporter Matt Hoffman, also of KPBS, Megan Burks, who covers education for KPBS, and Michael Smolens, columnist with the San Diego Union Tribune. Well, San Diego voters are facing a long, sometimes complicated ballot this time around. One vexing issue involves rent control. It's contained in State Proposition 10. And Taryn, just start right there. What does Prop 10 specifically do?
Well, the first thing that's important to get out is that what it doesn't do, it doesn't cause rent control across the state. It just would lift restrictions and give cities more freedom to create their own rent control policies. And those restrictions, which are spelled out in the Costa-Hawkins law, are that they can't apply to units built after 95, can't apply to single-family homes, and you also can't put limits on how much a landlord can increase rent once a tenant moves out of a rent-controlled unit. Okay, and give us an idea, just generally, how high rents are in our area. They're very high and been going up very fast for a while. Right, so there was a report in the UT, actually did a story on it. It showed that the average rent reached about $1,800, $1,900 in a month in March. And that was a 20% increase since March 2015. But I think it's important to note that the report only looked at complexes with 25 or more units. There's a lot of complexes out there that have far fewer, 6, 8, 12. But in the story that I did, looking at a landlord that owned a unit in Normal Heights, it was a studio. He was putting $8,500 in to improve it, but he was going to increase the rent from $1,350 to $1,900 or $1,975, and that was for a studio. That's almost 50% jump in that. Now, it seems like a simple rallying cry. Rents are too high. Who's supporting Prop 10, and what do they say it's going to accomplish? So for donors, the biggest donor behind the yes on Prop 10 is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. And that's because they say that a lack of affordable housing can affect the health of their patients. But there's also tenants' rights groups and low-income earners and those on a fixed income that are really pushing for this as well. And they're saying that, like, hey, rents are just increasing too much. Wages aren't going up at the same pace. And we need something to stop the burden that's being put on Californians. I think it's like 80% of households, of low-income households in California are rent burden, which means 30% or more of your income. A huge chunk of your income is going to this. Now, who's opposed, and what are the consequences they're warning about? So property owners, real estate companies are really not having Prop 10. They really don't want these restrictions to be removed. They say it won't work, and it'll actually make the housing crisis worse because it'll create less investment in rental properties, that landlords will want to spend less on maintenance. They don't want to actually invest in the construction of rental units, and they may even actually hurt the supply we already have because some might take their units off the rental market altogether and convert them to condos. And there's been some studies on this and looking at rent control in California, and what are the broad conclusions there? Well, it does keep people, the studies show that it does keep people in their homes longer. But people argue that that means that families, as they grow or they shrink, might be remaining in units that really don't fit their family size, and that it's not always lower income people who actually benefit. Some people who earn more money actually benefit just as much as a lower income person might as well. And they did find that did hurt a little bit of the investment in maintenance and actually and possibly the supply with condo conversions. But there's an argument that local policies can create incentives to address that. Yeah, I was going to ask that there's a measure in National City for rent control. How did they try to address some of those concerns? So Measure W would create rent control and a rent board. And I spoke to some of the supporters, and they say if there are significant capital improvements that are required in order to raise rent, you could go to the rent board and request an additional increase beyond what the ordinance already provides each year. Okay, short time left on this topic. Any indications how Prop 10 is going to do statewide? Polls are showing that's not doing great. And that probably has a lot to do with the fact that opponents are really, really outspending supporters here. I think the LA Times story quoted 3-1.
Oh, okay, and that gives you, it shows you who the backers are and where the deep pockets.
It looks like as we get closer and closer, and more money is being pumped into ads from the opposition, that support for Prop 10 seems to be declining.
Okay, all right. We'll watch that one with everything else on Tuesday night. Well, another ballot question leaving many voters feeling adrift is school bonds. School districts commonly offer bonds to investors backed by property taxes. But how do voters know if a particular bond issue is a good one or not? So, Megan, start with the basic question there. What is a school bond? How does it work?
So it's kind of like taking out a loan with future property taxes as collateral. So you're using that property tax to pay back the bond, to pay back investors who purchase these bonds.
Okay. And how many districts are asking voters to approve bonds this time around?
There are 11.
11 in our area.
Yeah. So not every voter is going to vote on all of those. They'll vote on their own local district.
Right. Everybody
11.
gets their particular ballot. But
Yeah.
so a lot of voters here, maybe most voters, are going to be looking at some form of a school bond wherever they are and where their district happens to be. And generally, what are these funds used for, and how do they break them down where the money goes?
So for the most part, across all of these districts, it's to repair and upgrade facilities. There's a lot of aging facilities and not as much revenue in local school districts to keep up with those needs. In places like Bonsall, districts that are actually growing and seeing more development and therefore more kids, they actually want to build new schools, so sometimes it's for that. But across the board, it's pretty much repairs and upgrades.
Keeping up with things. So. Michael?
Well, as you've reported, that particularly with San Diego Unified, they still have, a couple $2 billion in unspent bond money. How does that work, and how do they justify that?
So I spoke with them, and they said that I think back in 2008, could have been earlier, I'm not sure, they did a master plan and assessed all of their needs, and they had this big number, something like more than $7 billion in needed repairs. So they said that they really set out to put a package of bonds before voters. So we had Props S and Z, and this is really the completion of that package to get them to that large number, is what they say.
Is that a tough sell to people if people know they've got money in the bank, even though it is supposed to be committed?
So yeah, you're right. It's committed. So everything has been earmarked, they say. I think for the most part, that's certainly what the opposition is looking at the most and harping on the most. But school bonds are pretty popular among voters because often the pitch and what you see in your ballot is, do you want to improve education for kids, and how do you say no to that?
Right. Now, there was a problem. They don't often make big news, but we talked about it on this show, Poway had a capital appreciation bond a few years back.
The $1 billion bond.
Yeah, tell us briefly what happened there.
Yeah, so once voters approve this bond, then they actually go to the market and sell these bonds. And so what Poway did is they entered into an agreement where they didn't pay for a long time. And so
backloaded the thing.
Right. And so interest piled up and up, and it went from $105 million to a total cost of $1 billion.
A real big problem. It's like a homeowner who's got a balloon loan and they pay low at the beginning, and all of a sudden it comes with.
And the beauty of pushing it off on the future office holders after they're off the board.
Right.
Yeah.
These board members don't have to worry about that. Now, how do voters know if a bond's a good one to vote for or not? I mean, we can't all be expected to be experts in this school financing.
Right. So I should say that the state has since passed some laws that aim to protect taxpayers from something like that Poway bond. So it's not as much of a risk for voters anymore. What they can do is they can look back at how previous bonds were administered. The Taxpayers Association gives grades based on how transparent they were. So they can look back at audits and that sort of thing to see, did they do a good job of doing what they said they were going to do, doing it at cost.
And do voters usually go for them? I mean, as you said, it's a warm and fuzzy sell here to help the kids.
Yeah, it looks like about 70% of bonds do pass statewide.
Oh, okay, so that's and then again, these are narrow issues at local levels. You don't see a lot of polling in these individual races, right? So it's tough to gauge what's going to happen. All right, almost out of time on this topic, but if I'm an individual and I'm conscientious and going over my ballot, maybe I'm going early and I've got Google and everything else there. not voting on election day itself. How do I dive into something like this and know if it's a good deal?
Well, like I said, the one group that does take a look at all of the bonds and say whether or not they endorse them is the Taxpayers Association. There are some items that the Taxpayers Association look at that could be seen as partisan, so they don't like project labor agreements that tend to benefit unions. But you can look at that and kind of suss that out and see where you fall on it. We also put together a spreadsheet looking at some of those nonpartisan, laying out some of those nonpartisan items on KPBS.
And of course, you can always look at endorsements and newspaper endorsements, etc. All right, well, that'll be an interesting one. We'll have all that as we wrap it all up on election night. We're going to move on. There seems to be a misconception among some California tourists. They read that recreational marijuana is legal here. So let's head down to the grocery, the convenience store, and pick some up. Of course, that's not how it works. Matt, start this segment. Explain how California's law regarding recreational marijuana does work.
Right, so yeah, Prop 64, and then this year, the Bureau of Cannabis Control, the state regulatory board, started accepting licenses, and they started obviously accepting and licensing some businesses. But they left it up to local jurisdictions to kind of, set what they want. And you're seeing here in San Diego, obviously, the city of San Diego has recreational sales, but different cities now are starting to take this up and figure out, do they want this? Do they want to tax this? And what all they want to do with it?
And many or most do not right now, but they can in the future, right?
Right, yeah. I think it's about 50-50 right now, maybe a third to two-thirds. But it's starting to grow. More cities are starting to look at it. You're starting to see some North County cities look at it. And then this year, obviously, we have a number of measures on the ballot.
Yeah, they see a revenue stream. Well, let's start with some of those measures. Several county communities are looking at it. Start with La Mesa.
Yeah, so Measure V in La Mesa. So already in La Mesa, medical sales are legal. There's only one dispensary right now. It's called The Grove. They have a number of them coming online soon, and a number of people have applied for licenses. But basically, if voters approve this, it would put us up to a 6% tax on gross sales. Also some stuff in there for cultivation, like $10 per canopy square. La Mesa says that they think they can generate about $1.5 million at least a year for that to go toward general services, police, and fire. And
there'd be more places to buy it, presumably, if that were to pass, and then just the one place. Now, right. What about Chula Vista?
Yeah, Chula Vista has a big problem right now with illegal dispensaries, and to kind of combat that, back in March, the city passed an ordinance for recreational sales, but that was contingent on a business tax passing to the voters. So that's what we have now, Measure Q, which basically says at least a 5% tax, but no more than 15% tax on gross sales. So sort of similar to La Mesa. They also have something in there for cultivation as well. Now in Chula Vista, they say they think they can generate up to $6 million a year off all this once it all gets going. I think it would be up to 3 marijuana businesses per council district. 2 of those could be storefronts. And so you could have a number of marijuana businesses coming in there. And they say that money would go toward general services, but also shutting down illegal operations. I mean, when we went there to do our story, we went on 3rd Avenue. There's 4 or 5 of them. I mean, they're everywhere. They got guys shaking signs and not even hiding.
That's still a big issue for a lot of cities within the county then.
Oh, yeah, it is a very big issue. And I mean, Chula Vista, they just shut down one that we were filming the other day. The Sheriff's Department has an issue with them, too, in the unincorporated areas. El Cajon, Vista said they've shut down a number of them, I think like 40 of them over the last few years.
And Vista's another place that's got it on the ballot this time around.
Right, yeah. So right now in Vista, there's no legal marijuana sales going on. They say they do have a big problem with illegal dispensaries as well. And Vista's got 3 measures going to voters. So the first one's a citizens initiative called Measure Z, and that would allow up to 11 medical dispensaries within the city.
Just medical marijuana?
Just medical marijuana. And so we're not talking about recreational, we're not talking about delivery, up to 11. It would also impose up to 7% special use tax on those sales. Now, the city, when that came out, the city said, oh no, we need to give voters a choice. So they decided to put 2 of their own measures on the ballot. So they came up with Measure BB, which is delivery only. So no storefronts, up to 3 delivery services and up to 2 testing facilities. The city council believes that's a better way for them to be able to track it. And they don't want to go from like their 0 to 100, they want to go from like 0 to 30. But also, and then after BB, they said, okay, we need to tax this, so they passed Measure AA. It's a little bit in the weeds here, I know. But
you better not be sampling the product before you fill out the ballot on pot and Vista.
Yeah, so Vista voters are going to be really confused, I think. But Measure AA basically would put up to a 3.5% tax on testing, up to 12% on retail sales. And so the city's kind of, they threw a bunch of different things in there, kind of just preparing for the future. But I don't think the city of Vista ever wanted to deal with this. Once that citizens initiative came, they were sort of like, oh no.
Do you think, Matt, and Mark brought up the point, people getting confused, do you have the sense that I'm sure the city council was very sincere, but that some people are thinking this might confuse voters enough that they just might
vote no on everything.
That's sort of a pattern that happens. When
absolutely. I mean, the backers behind Measure Z, they say that it's just an attempt to confuse voters. I mean, voters are going to be literally seeing 3 measures about cannabis on their ballot. But Prop 64, I can't remember what the exact numbers, but it was over 50% of voters did approve that. So there is a need there, and Mayor Judy Ritter says she would just rather have deliveries and sort of phase in here instead of going from 0 medical shops to potentially 11.
What about delivery businesses? Does that come up in any of these measures?
Yeah, totally. So obviously Vista, the city-sponsored measure, is going for delivery only. They say that's a safer way, be it in an unmarked van. But then you have Measure Z people saying, well, you don't know where those sales are occurring. You don't know what they're selling.
So delivery is a whole controversial thing.
Right, yeah. They say storefronts, you have an armed guard outside, you have cameras, you know exactly what's going on. But if you go to Vista, there's Measure Z signs everywhere. I mean, it's a really getting a lot of promotion up there. And the city council is...
Yeah.
Sorry,
no, with deliveries, I'm just wondering, does that mean that it would allow kind of like a facility to be within that city's borders and then they can deliver from there? Or is this allowing, pot shops in other jurisdictions coming in and delivering as well?
Across city lines.
Right. So it would allow for, the businesses to be there, but there wouldn't be a storefront. So like if I wanted to start a business, I would have some sort of warehouse where I keep my stuff.
Right.
And then
no one can walk in.
Right, and I drive the van in and out of there.
Right.
But that's obviously the big argument they have, because they say, well, how do you know what's being sold? Whereas in a storefront, there's cameras and there's a security guard. So.
Almost out of time on this topic. Is pot tourism becoming a big thing here in Southern California, San Diego, and elsewhere?
Oh, yeah, totally. So the one that we went to, it's just medical only in the Mesa. It's called the Grove. It just opened up there in August. And they said they get about 50 people a day they have to turn away because they think that they just come out of the car. They're like, hey, we want to buy some pot. Yeah. And they says, no, you got to go to City San Diego to do that. That's the only place here that allows that right now. Obviously, there are ways to sign up for cards quickly, and they do offer that. But there is a growing industry here. And the owner of the Grove says, a lot of cities, some cities are staying away with this, like with a 10-foot pole, like El Cajon. And some cities are saying, hey, maybe we can make some money on this, like Chula Vista. Oceanside's allowing deliveries. Obviously, right now, the Bureau of Cannabis Control is updating their regulations, saying that deliveries from a legal municipality can go anywhere, but then you have a bunch of cities.
Well, and you see the billboards, coming onto the airport here, and I was recently down at the beach. There was a shuttle van wanting to pick folks up at the beach and take them up to there, and that was in the city of San Diego.
That was an Ocean Beach, probably.
That was an Ocean Beach.
It's the MO.
You're familiar with the background in Ocean Beach. All right. Well, another one to watch, or several to watch as we go through our list on election night coverage. Well, we're going to move on. It used to be known as the silly season, but silly seems far too tepid a word to cover the election's final days in the time of Trump. To the president and his supporters, the caravan of Central Americans are, quote, invaders. Fox News commentators have used the term over 100 times, according to CNN, Trump's favorite nemesis network. And time to send in the army and repeat after the president, this is not a stunt. And Michael, you wrote about this this week, a lot of things to unpack here. The immigration crisis here got the attention of 3 of the president's opponents.
They felt that everybody was talking about it. They were going to civic clubs and people were asking because the president's saying maybe Democrats are funding this and the like. And they're being asked about that. They were sort of surprised, I think, that serious people were taking this seriously because there's no evidence of that. Also, you got to keep in mind, it's a political move by the president. He might not call it a stunt, but it's all about what's going to happen on Tuesday to divert attention from other things. But these 3 Democratic office holders, it was kind of interesting because it was
who are they?
Political on their part. It was Congressman Scott Peters, Assemblyman Todd Gloria, and supervisorial candidate Nathan Fletcher. They've sort of made a habit of taking on Trump. They're in very Democratic districts, and so this sort of works for them. I mean, what was sort of interesting, when I first came into it, I'd seen some clips on Twitter that from one of them, and it had Trump talking about San Diego and how San Diegans want the wall, and we're building the wall down there. Well, it's debatable whether San Diegans want the wall. They're replacing certain aspects of the wall. They're not building his new wall down there. And we've had a wall and a fence for a long time. I thought, well, this happened last night. He's mentioning San Diego again. It was actually a clip from May. And so the Democrats, kind of pulled that out to bring San Diegans into this so they could, bring their opposition to Trump to the fore, which tends to work politically in their district.
Now, immigration, legal and illegal, long been an issue in California, especially here in the border region. Do San Diegans generally buy Trump's contention that this caravan coming up from Central America, which is still weeks and 1,000 miles away or so, that represents a, quote, national emergency?
I can't really speak for how San Diegans all feel about it, but I mean, we've been through this before. I think that people are concerned, regardless of what they think about Trump. A crisis, I don't think most people feel that way. I think that we've had caravans, smaller ones come up. It's been, an issue at the border, but people have not been overrunning the border. Do we need 15,000 troops along the border? Most people don't seem to think so, or a lot of people don't seem to think so. Again, with Tuesday away, it's really hard to separate what's real and what's totally political here. There have always been support from National Guard and sometimes troops at times when things get a little dicey and so forth. But I think you also got to keep in mind a couple of things, taking a step back. Trump always likes dealing with immigration as an issue politically.
It's a pony to ride.
He's got majorities in both houses of Congress. We have had no real movement at all on comprehensive immigration reform, which everybody says they want. He blames the Democrats, but it was really divisions among the Republicans that stopped that. And also, why is there even a need for troops at the border? The Border Patrol and Border Security was supposed to be so built up, and a lot of that hasn't happened. In a way, in addition to trying to help the Republicans out on Tuesday, this covers up for a lot of shortcomings in his policy.
Yeah. Matt?
And I was going to say, with this caravan, aren't they a couple months away and like 1,000 miles away? So, when they say, we're sending all these troops, it's not like we're under imminent, nothing's coming right now, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's why the word invader is so loaded.
It is. Again, and that underscores, what's really going on here. It's, again, not that many people, if they make it, because in past caravans, people have dropped off and they probably won't get anywhere near the numbers that they are marching. But, yeah, it's a ways down the line. Do you have to prepare for it? Sure. But do you have to, try to frighten the dickens out of everybody? That's another question.
Well, Tuesday's coming. Megan?
Well, the last caravan that made it to Tijuana, a very small number of those people were actually led into the United States as asylum seekers or as asylum.
Well, and that's the point here, that these are asylum seekers for the most part. Are there going to be some bad apples there? Of course. But, there is a legal asylum process, and most people don't get in. The arrests were very few comparatively of people trying to illegally cross from that last caravan.
Yeah, I was going to say it's important to point out that there is an intention for a lot of them to go through the asylum seeking process, which requires a very orderly fashion, seeking that at the port of entry, not, crawling over the fences. Like there's some kind of fear that would actually be happening. And there actually, I believe, the Secretary of State came out when announcing the cap on refugees, saying that the cap's being reduced on refugees to further compensate for an increase in the expected asylum applications.
It's unfortunate. It's a serious issue, and we are on the front lines of it in San Diego. We've had experience with this, and there's a lot of frustration here and elsewhere. But to hype it up like this now is I think, equally frustrating to a lot of people.
I think you're right. It's too soon to tell how much of this is a political stunt and just how many troops will come to the San Diego border. But I wish our leaders were speaking out more about what would this look like for San Diego. I saw a military plane flying over my neighborhood this past week, and I thought, this could be the new norm. And what does that mean for our neighborhoods?
Right. Well, the president's doing multiple rallies between now and Election Day, featuring, of course, the Build the Wall chants that he's had for years now in these rallies. Claims San Diego supports a border wall. Californians are rioting over the notion of sanctuary cities. How are those claims playing out with our electorate?
Well, they peter out.
I missed those
quick.
stories
Again,
on the riots.
To say how they play out with an electric, I think the electric depends on your political point of view, but there have been no riots over the state sanctuary law. There's been a lot of dispute and discussion, and various cities and counties have taken actions one way or another. He threw that out there. He's been throwing a lot of stuff against the wall in the stretch run to the election to see what sticks. A lot of it on immigration, from the birthright to riots on the sanctuary law, which haven't happened. To fire up his base. Is that going to get enough of the swing districts that are, at issue, and who controls the House? We'll see. But it certainly helps his base in certain red districts in red states. Well, speaking of red districts and House seats, we have, of course, a notable and spotlighted district right here in the 50th. There's been some negative ads from Congressman Duncan Hunter, claims his opponent's a secret terrorist attempting to infiltrate Congress, which kind of goes hand in hand with some of these negative ads that we've been talking about. UT did a deep dive into his opponent, Democrat Amar Kampa-Najjar, and family history this week and all. How is it playing out there, do you know? Well, it's hard to say. It's gotten a lot of attention, and it's gotten a lot of criticism, and the fact checkers have all given it the highest, negative rating, 4 Pinocchios from the Washington Post, which is their worst rating in terms of the accuracy of it. Amar Kampanajjar's grandfather, who was killed 16 years before he was born, never met, was part of a group that was involved in the Munich 1972 massacre of Israeli athletes. It's really unfortunate family history, and you knew this was going to come up politically. I mean, despite whatever distance he has, he's condemned that and so forth. But the reality of it also is that he's been vetted by the federal government. He's received 2 security clearances because he had sort of mid-level posts in the Obama administration. And the irony is, as I've mentioned several times in columns, that Duncan Hunter, his, the incumbent opponent, is under federal indictment for misuse of campaign funds. That alone probably disqualifies him from federal security clearance. So, there's ironies abound.
All right, we'll leave it there with the irony, and we're going to watch on Tuesday night. A lot to unpack in this election. That wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Taryn Mento of KPBS News, Matt Hoffman of KPBS, Megan Burks of KPBS, a lot of local folks here today, and Michael Smolens of the San Diego Union Tribune. And be sure to check out our comprehensive voter guide on our website, kpbs.org, and be sure to vote on Tuesday and listen to us on television and radio Tuesday night and Wednesday for our results. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.